Hello, Joshin. Thank you. And I want to thank Joshin for giving me some pointers on doing a Zoom presentation because I have zero experience with this. Um, my background, basically, I've been a Mac nerd since 1984, owning my first Mac, I guess, in 1988. And I've worked in graphic design and web design, and then in 2000 I started doing Mac support, and then formalized it in 2002 when I joined the Apple Consultants Network, where I'm certified every few years by Apple, and I work mostly with people one-on-one. Tutoring, troubleshooting, stuff like that. So I'm not used to doing presentations, although I did do an in-person presentation for the PMUG a couple of years ago, 2, 3, 4, I don't know, time is just, it was on Weebly, I think, designing your own website. And I do wish I could see everybody here. Can I see more? I can do the gallery. Okay, yeah. There we go. I see some, yeah, people who are still being recorded. I can see your hands. That's nice, because I'm going to ask a few questions and get a show of hands, and I'll have to switch back and forth between the two screens so I can see everybody. I wish that Zoom gave us a way to see everybody at once, no matter how small. Just a brief recap of my journey in photography. 50 years ago, as a 10-year-old, I got into black and white photography with a Kodak Retina 35 millimeter camera. And then as a teenager, I got into developing my black and white film and printing black and white photos in my basement darkroom, and I absolutely loved it. And then with the advent of digital photography, I finally dipped my toe in those waters in 2001, 19 years ago, with a Canon Digital Elf. Anybody else remember that camera? It was a tiny little brick, heavy, dense, had a great feeling about it. The resolution was 1600 by 1200, minuscule by today's standards. And it ran through the battery like crazy, but it was amazing because now you were able to take digital photos. And years later, I moved on to the big, heavy Nikon digital single reflex cameras, single lens reflex. And it's been absolutely amazing to have digital photos that are completely malleable and editable and so forth. But I find that one of the biggest challenges, and also with a lot of the clients I work with, because my specialty is helping people with photos, organizing, importing, editing, sharing, is that everybody's just dying under the sheer volume of photos. Because you can walk out in a couple of hours and shoot, 300 photographs, or on a weekend, 1,000 photographs. And then you have to import them all. You have to cull them. You have to organize them. And most people don't even get to that anymore. So most people just shoot until the hard drive fills up, and then they get a bigger computer or external storage. It's a real curse. It's a blessing and a curse. And I sometimes find myself harking back to the good old days of a 24 or 36 exposure roll of film, where you just had to really be judicious on what you took photos of. So in the early days of digital photography, of course, iPhoto was great. I'm sure everybody here has at least dipped their toes into iPhoto at some point. One of my biggest beefs with iPhoto was that with each new release, it seemed like major things were changed, major elements were moved around. It was always kind of disorienting. And then there was the horrible transition between iPhoto and Photos. Remember that? When Apple just sort of sprung Photos on you, didn't really tell you what it involved. And suddenly you had a completely new interface that in my mind was not really ready for prime time. And people didn't realize at the time, if you launched, if you double clicked, or if you tried to launch your iPhoto library, it would open up in Photos. And then at that point, you still had an iPhoto library and the iPhoto app on your computer. And there was a fork in the road. And any new work would go into the photos library, but some of my clients would stumble into their old iPhoto library. They'd be opening their old iPhoto library in iPhoto, then I'd be opening the branch in the road in Photos, and they would be divergent and sometimes overlapping because they go back and forth. It was a nightmare. The other nightmare was that Apple, in their quest to make things easy for consumers to use, they hide a lot of complexity behind the curtain, right? Who here, I'm going to flip back and forth, show of hands, who here has ever looked into, in the old iPhoto library with a right click or a control click in the Finder and right clicked on the iPhoto library and select View Package Contents? Anybody there, show of hands? If you ever want to do that, it's very instructive. So control click or right click on the iPhoto library or on the Photos library. So what you see, Apple presents you with a monolithic file, your iPhoto or Photos library, and they say, let us handle everything else. You're in good hands, which most of the time is true. But in order to present a very simple interface, they had to do a lot of complex stuff in the background. And sometimes that would go kerplooey. And in the olden days, I would often come across iPhoto libraries that had been corrupted. Show of hands. Anybody who's had to deal with corrupted iPhoto libraries? And what I would sometimes, so then you would have to rebuild the library. And sometimes in a case like this, you would get a folder, just like you get a mailbox in Apple Mail sometimes. In Apple Mail, you'll see recovered mail. And in iPhoto, sometimes you'd see a new album called Recovered Photos. And you'd think, well, where are these photos recovered from? And to me, it was always, the example was, well, it's like, when you're digging in your sofa cushions, what do you got? Crumbs, you've got coins, you've got a spare key. Who knows what comes up out of there? But that's the kind of stuff that would sometimes churn around in the background of the iPhoto library. Sometimes these libraries could be salvaged. Sometimes they couldn't. I can't tell you the number of machines I've come across with my clients where they're like orphan files left over from what I call an exploded iPhoto library. So bits and pieces of a library out of this monolithic file came spewing out. It's a nightmare. Now, the good news is that although Photos, the successor to iPhoto, was really not ready for prime time when it came out, it's come a long way, and I can recommend it much more wholeheartedly. And even though Apple still hides all the workings in this monolithic file, it's been a lot more stable. I've not seen any corrupted Photos libraries yet. So, but what pushed me initially to go beyond iPhoto at the time was that I had 40,000 photographs, and I sort of thought, I want to do fine art photography. I want to organize my photos. And most of all, I want to have control of my photos. I want to see them in folders in the Finder. I want to know what's going on. I don't want stuff hidden behind the curtain. And in the early days, your only real options were Photoshop, or let's say Photoshop Elements. And you could then work with your pictures in the Finder. There was also Adobe Bridge. Show of hands, anybody who's worked with Adobe Bridge? Bridge is kind of it was like an intermediate Finder. It was like another overlay over the Finder. I never had much use for it. And Photoshop was the ultimate, or still is the ultimate photo editing tool, but it did nothing for organizing. Bridge was supposed to help you organize, but it didn't really. Photoshop Elements was sort of a dumbed down version of Photoshop, but it was a kind of clunky. And so when Lightroom came out about, God, I don't know, 10 years ago, it changed my world because it combined the power of Photoshop, or the power of 90% of the power of Photoshop, with a killer organizational tool. Power of Photoshop, killer organizational tool, and non-destructive edits. Because when you were in iPhoto and Photos, you can edit a photo, But if you're unhappy with the result, you can always roll back to the original. You can revert to original. What was nice about Lightroom is you could import a picture and you could apply, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 different edits to it. And not only could you roll back to the original, but you could roll back to any step along the way. And that was incredible. And in terms of non-destructive editing, of course, in Photoshop, if you didn't know how to use layers, which is very complicated, you could irreparably, damage an image by messing with the pixels and not know how to get back. And so Lightroom has really changed my life. I started with 40,000 photos. Now I have about 50,000. And it just, as I'll demonstrate, it lets you slice and dice and organize your collection in any which way. I wanted to apologize also that I'm not good with presentations in terms of Keynote. I mean, I bow down to Joshin. His presentations are amazing. So I'm really just using my words here, and then we'll give you a demonstration of Lightroom. But I also wanted to mention that, another show of hands here. Who has used Aperture? Apple's Aperture. Okay, a couple people. Because I want to say Aperture was a sort of Apple's answer to Lightroom, non-destructive editing, good organizational tools, but Apple axed that. And they brought a lot of those features into Photos. So again, I want to say Apple Photos is a really, really incredible tool, and it can do much more than iPhoto ever did, and is approaching the abilities of what Lightroom can do, at least in terms of editing. Now, Lightroom to me is the end-all be-all with editing and organizing, but it has one drawback, which is it's not part of the Apple ecosystem, So it's what's wonderful about Apple is you can have your iPhone, your iPad, your Mac, your laptop, all synced through iCloud Photos. And with Lightroom, you're in a different ecosystem. And so I sort of do my photography on two separate levels. I'll have sort of the stuff that's in iCloud. I'll have the stuff that's in Lightroom. Not an easy thing to navigate. Now, another show of hands. Who here is currently using Lightroom? 1, 2, 3, 4. Next screen. 5 or 6 people. And who's using the old-fashioned version of Lightroom, which is Lightroom Classic? 1, 2, couple. And who's using the new version of Lightroom, the cloud-based Lightroom? Aha, okay. So the interesting thing about that is the old-fashioned version of Lightroom that I use, Lightroom Classic, your photos are stored on your hard drive. You have control of them. They're in your Finder. And you have control of it. Now, the cloud-based version of Lightroom is kind of like iCloud Photos. Now, Adobe stores the photos on their server, something I'm not really comfortable with. And if you have lots and lots of photos, you have to pay Adobe for storing the stuff up there. And also, Adobe, the cloud-based version of Lightroom, does kind of what Apple Photos does too, which is it puts everything in sort of behind a curtain, and you don't really have that much control over it. However, you have the amazing ability to have your photos in sync on all your Macs and all your iDevices, just like iCloud Photos. One big drawback with the cloud version of Lightroom, you cannot print. You would have to export and then print in some other way. So that is awkward, but I do feel all the software industry, it's all moving to cloud-based stuff. I do feel that perhaps at some point, the old-fashioned hard drive version of Lightroom Classic that I love and many of us love will probably go the way of the dodo, and it'll all be, Joshin, it'll all be cloud-based is my guess. But I'm going to hang on till the very end. And I think with that, I will transition into just showing what Lightroom can do. And this is a high-end program, and it has a learning curve, but the rewards, if you stick with it, are just unbelievable. And Joshin, I wonder if you would be able to, if folks have questions that come up while I'm babbling on and on and on, if they could ping Joshin and he could maybe take notes. That way, if questions come up while I'm talking, we can address them later. That'd be great. But now let me shift over, let me hide Zoom. And now I can't see any of you, which is not great, but let me shrink this. No, I guess I just gotta completely hide it here. So I can't see if I'm getting blank stares or shaking heads, but Joshin, you speak up if you see any major problems, okay?
Be happy to. And
all right, thank you.
We're
so I want to take you through the basics of Lightroom, the organization overall. So here in Lightroom, we're here in what's called the library module. Mostly I go back and forth between the library, which is where you do your organizing, and the develop module, which is where you do your editing. So on the left side here, we've got the navigator, which gives you a thumbnail preview of whatever image is highlighted here in the grid. Next, we have the catalog. And this will show all of my photographs that are managed by Lightroom. And as well as other information here, my previous import, a quick collection where I might have gathered some things for quick use, and my previous export. Here is the thing that shows you where literally the pictures are stored in my Finder. So I love that I have access to this. I've got lots of random folders. And then for organizing my pictures, I've come up with a way that works for me, wouldn't necessarily work for everybody, but I do just import all my pictures basically into a rigid hierarchy of a folder for the year, within that a folder for each month, and within that a folder for each day. And I do this because rarely do I have a group of pictures where I find that I can give them all a folder name that would excuse me, I'm going to turn down my heat here. A folder name that would accommodate them all. So I just have a basic inbox by date, and I organize my photos in different ways. So that's basically mirrors what I have in my Finder. Here is one excellent level of organization, and this is basically this corresponds to albums in photos or folders. So here they call it a collection or a collection set. So this is where I put things in when I'm working on a project or I'm collecting things to give to somebody. Down here we have publish services, which is very cool because here you can link Lightroom to certain photo websites. So my photography website is at ronaldgehrmann.com, and I can publish to it directly from here. So this mirrors exactly the categories and albums that are on my website. And what I love about it is I can edit a picture in Lightroom. I can come back to it weeks, months after I've published it, decide to make a couple of tweaks, and then just click upload and it updates on my website. So publish services is very cool. Over here on the right side now, we have, let me go first to metadata. So here, for any given image that's selected, tons and tons of detailed metadata that you can look up. But what I love most is the keywording abilities in Lightroom. So with my keywording, in my mind, when you're dealing with thousands of photos, keywords are essential, but they are also a bear to do. So when I first got Lightroom, I had to plow my way through keywording 40,000 photos, and that takes time. Little sidebar, one of the advantages of the cloud-based version of Lightroom is it has artificial intelligence, machine learning, or what have you, and it will automatically analyze your images and find, and so you can search on keywords that you haven't had to apply. So that's nice. They don't have that for the desktop-based Lightroom. So I've got my keywords hierarchically organized, you know, so I'll have events and trips by year. And then I'll have the types of things that I like to photograph, you know. So for example, nature. In nature, you know, here are all my animal shots, and here are beach and coast shots. And so what this enables you to do, if you really, really spend your time keywording, then you can really drill down and find just what you're looking for. Even better, akin to a smart album in Photoshop, a smart album in Photos, in Lightroom, you can have smart collections. So for example, a smart collection is like a saved search. So I can say, find me all of the pictures that have no adjustments to them, or find me all of the pictures that I've cropped square. Here's my collection of creepy dolls, which are so fascinating to me. Because I rarely shoot vertical, but sometimes I want to find vertical, here are my photos that are vertical, regardless of when they were shot, when they were added, and so forth. Or here are pictures that I've edited today. Here are pictures I've edited in the last 2 weeks. It just goes on and on in the ways that you can slice and dice and search for things. So with that, and that's mostly the boring stuff, with that, let's switch over to the develop module. So, and I put together a collection for some images to look at. And now I'm going to go to the develop module. Now, in the develop module, we have on the left, we have presets. Lots and lots of creative presets that you can apply to things. I never go in here. I'm sort of bored with presets. I like to tinker myself, but they are there if you like them. Then I also still have access to my collections, so I can grab pictures for editing. But the coolest thing here is that the history. So as I make edits, each single thing that I change, it's a step here. So not only can I go back step by step, as we'll see in a minute, but I can see what I did at each given step. And so now, just for fun, I picked up this random picture, and I'm going to show you what we can do with editing over here on the right side. And here are all your edit options. 90% of what I do is in basic. You've got color temperature, tint, exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, texture, clarity, vibrance. These are very, very powerful. Then here you get, as you go further down, it gets more nerdy. You've got the tone curve where you can play with the histogram. You've got detail where you can deal with sharpening and noise reduction. You've got transform where you can do amazing, you know, when you've taken a photograph that involves architecture and you need to fix distortion, this is fantastic. Then we've got all kinds of color tweaks and black and white tweaks. Then we have effects like vignetting and grain, color grading. This just came in, it's tinting and so forth. And then there are lens corrections where every camera lens or every iPhone lens has a built-in distortion, and Lightroom knows the lens profiles and then can correct for that distortion. So as you can see here, perhaps I'm clicking enable profile corrections, and if you look at the picture, you'll see it slightly shifts to counter the distortion. Some lenses you see it very profoundly, and some you don't. Calibration, I never go here. It's too nerdy even for me. So just with a basic picture here, let's just see what we can do. We can straighten it. Nobody wants the ocean pouring off to one side. And then one of the first things I'll do, oh, another sidebar. Many of you may know the difference between shooting a JPEG image and shooting a RAW. So a RAW is like a negative. And back in the old days, you know, if you shot a picture and you had a negative, you could develop it any which way, lots of different ways, while still retaining the negative unchanged. A RAW file is the same type of thing. Lightroom can import RAW files. RAW files are never changed themselves, but edits can be applied to them. And what Lightroom does, and I forgot to mention this too, Lightroom is fast in editing. In Photoshop, typically, if you apply some kind of edit, you might have to wait 5 or 10 seconds for it to be applied. In Lightroom, it's virtually instantaneous because you're basically working on a preview of the image so you can see it quickly, where the time is then spent rendering an image for output is when you are saving an image to export to JPEG. So, and a RAW file or a digital negative file will give you incredible latitude for correcting pictures. You might look at a picture and feel like the shadows are completely filled in, you can't see anything, it's unsalvageable, or the sky is completely blown out, it's unsalvageable. But with a RAW image, you could dial down the highlights and bring up the shadows, and I'll demonstrate that a little bit now. So random picture, gray day at the beach, and right away in this digital negative file, I can bring up the darkness, the shadows, and completely salvage that area of the picture. I can also play with the exposure overall. I can bring a little more vibrance in, a little more color to boost it. I can do, there's something called clarity, which is amazing. It enhances the edge contrast of things. Now, I'll often play with this and push it really far and just see, you know, it can become sort of comical and overdone, but then you can dial it back and find a happy medium. Taking clarity to the other direction, you get sort of the Vaseline smear dreamlike effect, which could be interesting. And clarity is something I use a lot because it just gives a sharpness to it without making it look grainy, but it does sometimes suck some of the color out of it. Recently, Adobe came out with the texture slider, which gives you some of that effect of more sharpness, but without sucking the color out of it. And now, so my favorite shortcut, you know, in Lightroom is I have an image like this and I hit my backslash, and this is before and this is after, and it's just an absolutely stunning thing to see that you can salvage an image that otherwise would seem completely lost. So let me see. I brought a few other pictures just to see some of the befores and afters that you could see. So this image at Nehalem Bay, beautiful driftwood, this was what came out of my camera, and this is what I was able to change it to. So I straightened it, of course, I zoomed in, I cropped it to make the central image more prominent, and I brought out the color and the details and the darks, and all of this is completely quick and easy to do and easy to undo and experiment with. And then here is an image, old building, you know, not that remarkable in color, and converted to black and white, it can be quite striking. And let me just demonstrate here. So this is one of the interesting things about converting to black and white. So you can decide to convert an image to black and white, but then you can choose how a given color translates to either black or white. And there's this wonderful little adjustment tool here, which I can now click an area in the image. So this red brick, if I slide this up, the red translates more to white. If I slide it down, it translates more to black. So you can really completely change the feeling of an image in your black and white mix. And the same goes for the sky. If I target the blue sky and I pull down, it gets really foreboding and dark, or it can get very light. So again, just amazing creative possibilities. Another before and after, very dark areas in here and nice and crisp and bright. And here you can see what I did with the geometry, the transform tool. So it's a little distorted here. And what I did then was in my develop tool, I go to I go to transform, and I can drag a guideline across something that I want to be vertical, and then I can drag a second guideline, and it automatically adjusts the rest of the image to remove the distortion. Oh, I haven't, yeah, there's so much good stuff, of course, to show. I'm going to probably wind up my presentation soon and take questions, but didn't want to forget another killer feature of Lightroom is that you can do targeted adjustments. In photos, whatever edits you do really affect the entire image unless you're doing a little bit of retouching. Here in Lightroom, you can apply specific adjustments to just specific areas. You can paint them in. So for example, if I want to just brighten the shadows or brighten the exposure in here, I can now paint in there and only apply to that area. I mean, it's unbelievable. I now do 99% of my edits in Lightroom, but once in a while you'll come across something challenging, something that you want to really retouch more than you could in Lightroom. I mean, Lightroom has a spot correction tool, which let me find a way to demonstrate that.
We have a question from somebody about the use of masking, and I think the spot correction tool and the brush you just showed us is a great way to show how you can apply in a very intuitive manner the corrections right where you want them.
That's exactly right. It's like masking. Now, let me see. I don't have a good example for the spot correction. Well, maybe here. So let's say I want to get rid of this, this spit of land here at low tide. With the spot correction tool, I do believe I can just paint over it. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. Yeah, and it kind of, sort of, as they say, your mileage may vary, but for really extreme corrections and editing, the round tripping from Lightroom to Photoshop is a breeze. You say edit in Photoshop, you go, it opens Photoshop, you do your edits, and you're back in Lightroom. And I think perhaps maybe I'm going to stop. Joshin, what do you think? Stop screen sharing, take some questions. I don't want to overwhelm people with too much babbling here.
I was kind of curious, like in the beach photo, it was nice to see the before and after of the tree. And I was curious, or the next one over.
Oh, yeah, got it.
You're saying that we can see the whole recipe of exactly everything you did as you were playing around with the image?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good idea. So I will sort of reconstruct it. So what I'll start with is straightening the horizon. And then let me close the side panel, which we don't need right now.
Although I did see on that side panel, it looked like the history was updating as every single.
Exactly. Yeah. Let me then leave that. Let me leave that visible. So, the next thing I would probably do is bring some light into the shadows. And then, there's vibrance. And years and years ago, I felt that it was cheating to do too much kind of editing and enhancing, because I sort of felt photography owed it, to be more documentary. But I came across this quote years ago that really speaks about how I feel now, which is, I want to edit a photo so that if it evokes what I felt when I saw the image, and what we can see with the eye. A camera sometimes is just a pale depiction. And so, I think it's okay within reason to improve images. And also, it's more about poetry. It's not about documentation, and there's so much subjectivity anyway. So there's that. Vibrance.
Oh,
go ahead.
Does it also easily do things like vignetting, where you can draw the viewer's eye exactly where you want it to go?
Thank you, Joshin. Yes, it does. Let me move this little thing down here. So vignetting is under effects. And so here I can vignette. And I mean, it's amazing. I can choose where the midpoint is. I can choose the roundness of the effect. I can choose the feathering. So, so this is with zero feathering. We've got like a Warner Brothers, what was it, that Looney Tunes, roundness and feather. And so really it's amazing what you can do here. And it's interesting too, it's post-crop vignetting, which means that no matter how I choose to crop this, the vignette is still properly applied. Now, notice
the difference. Just cropping can totally change the character of a photo too.
Absolutely. There's so much I like to do with cropping. And look here on the left, each and every step that I've taken. And I can go back to at any point. So I can, if I've taken a detour, I can sort of go back here and then continue where I was. And feel free to interject with any other questions that people are asking at this point, Joshin. Vibrance is a great way to sort of gently boost the color. Saturation is more sort of heavy-handed. And then, of course, there's texture, which adds this crispness to us, which you may or may not be able to see as well on your screen. Also, of course, easy to zoom in. Now here's some lens dust on my, not lens, on my sensor. So here's where the spot correction tool is just great. Click, and it's gone. Let me see here. So yeah, here's a great example for cropping. So this is a before picture, and this is after. So what I've done here is I also converted it to black and white. So it was color, a lot of extraneous info in the foreground, and then converted to black and white. It brings out all this texture, and the extreme horizontal cropping is a lot of fun.
I've seen questions asking about the price, which starts around $10 a month, as I understand. And then also how long Classic might still be available.
Excellent. Yeah, it is. It's $10 a month, and you always get the current version of Lightroom and Photoshop. So in my mind, that's a fantastic deal, where any other Creative Cloud app, I think it's $25 a month or $20 a month. So it's a really great deal. And how long Classic will be around? God, I hope at least 5 more years. I think there would be an enormous outcry from professional photographers all over the world if they were try to cut that off any sooner. Sure. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
Charles Chiboy. I'm
Hi,
wondering, I have older copies of Lightroom.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have never installed it or used them. And they would not work with Catalina, I'm sure. But I could probably install them on an older computer that I have.
Mm-hmm.
Would you advise that? I hate Adobe's subscription method.
I do too. I fought it bitterly, and early on they were charging. I think they were going to charge $20 a month for it, or 25. But when they went down to 10, I thought, okay, it's worth it. But I completely understand that. Yes, you could install older versions on older Macs. Adobe, somewhere buried in their website, has the specs of what would run on what machine. It would be sad not to have a lot of the current features. But then again, if you're just starting out and just playing with it and don't mind running older software, that would work. Yeah, that would work.
Do you bother to use film cameras?
I don't anymore. I kind of miss it, but I don't. I still have old negatives and old slides that I want to scan and bring into Lightroom, but that is such a time-consuming task because even the best slide or negative scanner requires all kinds of tweaking of the images afterwards.
Now, Ron, I heard you say one of the things you liked about Lightroom is that it allows you to keep your photos on your hard drive in a way that you could find. If you stop paying for Lightroom, would you lose access to your photos?
I believe what they say is you don't lose access to your photos. Now, if you're using Lightroom Cloud, I believe you still have access to your photos, but it's a little sketchier. If you have the old-fashioned Lightroom Classic that I do, if you stop paying, you still have the app. You just no longer can edit. The edit module is disabled, as far as I understand.
Sounds good. Yeah, as I understood it too, all your files are right there in the Finder, so you can find them.
Exactly.
People are also excited about the location features in Lightroom.
Right, with GPS and so forth.
Yeah.
Is that right? Which I think,
yes.
Right. Let me see. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that does work just like in Apple Photos, of course. Now I'm trying to find where's my Zoom window so I can see folks again. Where are you? Oh, there it is. Okay, let's get rid of that. Here we go. Yes, that is true. So the location is great. Lightroom, the Classic, also has a facial recognition feature, just like Apple Photos. So that's kind of nice. You can go through all of your photos, and the more you teach it, the more it's able to pick people out. So that's very handy.
Good.
Fred has a question there.
I saw questions about using it to remove telephone wires, things like that, and then also about if the Lightroom works the same on an iPad.
So if you are based on an iPad, probably the cloud-based version of Lightroom is the way to go. Because although the classic version of Lightroom does let you sync between a Mac and iDevices, it's very, very clunky. But yeah, that is the amazing, and I play with the Lightroom Cloud sometimes, and it does whet my appetite because I can tinker on my laptop or on my iMac or my phone, and within seconds or minutes, the changes are in sync, just like through Apple Photos with iCloud Photos. It's pretty amazing.
So you're demonstrating today just the classic version that runs only on the Mac, but there's an entirely different Lightroom that runs on the iPad as well?
There is, and maybe in the future, if folks are interested, I'd be happy to do a demo of that. Yeah, it's quite a different world.
It probably will be the future.
Yeah. Now I saw Fred raised his hand earlier. He's somebody I saw.
Yes, my question is, if you use the earlier version of Lightroom, like Lightroom 6, is it easy to import the images to Lightroom Classic?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Very, very easy. Yeah. One of the things that's not easy, here's a little sidebar, is transitioning from Aperture to Lightroom. Adobe came out with a plugin. I think they worked with Apple, but the results of the import were just a nightmare. Not fun to deal with.
Okay, thank you.
I see Eleanor Siegel's hand is up.
Okay. Can you stitch photos, like multiple photos? And if so, can you show us?
That is a Photoshop thing that,
Okay.
yeah, Photoshop does that. And again, it's pretty cool because any pictures you have in Lightroom, you can bring them all into Photoshop and let them do a stitching thing or whatever, and then bring them back into Lightroom. Yeah. Yeah.
If I remember right, Eleanor, sometimes you scan handmade artworks and they're too big to fit on the scanning platen all at a single time.
Yeah. They're like 90 inches long panels, you know, maybe they're 8 inches each panel. So I scan like 2.5 panels at a time, and then I stitch it. And I'm using Affinity Photo, and that's about the only thing I can do in that program. But that's what I want it to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It would be that first image. It wouldn't be hard for you to remove some of the branches using the spot removal tool, just like Janine had been asking about.
Right. Let's try that. Let's check that out. So now anything that's connected to something else, it's tricky, right? Because then you have the boundary. Let's try first to remove these boulders here in the water. So, and then what's interesting is you can move, just like with the clone tool in Photoshop, you can move the source from where you're cloning, but you can see, if I zoom in, I can't zoom in too far here, but you can see that it gets a little messy with the clone tool. And that's where, I would want to shift to Photoshop, where you can do the most amazing cloning and disappearing of things. Let me try these branches here. Yeah, it gets, it's tricky. It's tricky. Oh, I think I moved the wrong thing. Here we go. Get over there. Nope. Ha! Swap them around. Source and target. Get away.
Looks like though you can be extremely flexible and explore.
Exactly. That's the whole thing. You have such latitude to experiment because you can always undo it. I mean, it's really, really fantastic. I could just go on and on and on, but I'd rather answer specific questions that folks have. Anyone else?
Question.
Yes.
Can you eliminate an individual edit at a later time? Just one edit?
Yep, I believe you can. And it's done using a thing, I think, called snapshots. Or see, you can, and I've never played with this, John. You can, the answer is, I'm sure it's doable. I've never played with it. The other thing that's fantastic is, let me get out of here, is what's called a virtual copy. So you can take a picture and you'll notice there's a little paper curl here. That means this is a virtual copy. That means I can fool around with this image, and again, because it's a raw image, I'm not affecting the original, and I can do any number of permutations. I can say, I want this version of the picture. This is my first, let's say, this is my color version. I can now create a virtual copy. It doesn't take up more space on disk. And I can then play with it to my heart's content. I can make it black and white. I can change the cropping, and I can add, vignetting like we did before. And all of that is, as you can see, I mean, it's instant. And so you can decide to take any given image down any number of creative pathways: color, boosted color, black and white.
Yeah.
I see Joyce has her hand up.
If you have a picture or like a portrait of, I have a grandson and I take a lot of pictures of him, but the background room is messy. Is there a way to keep I don't know the function where he would stay sharp and I could blur the background.
Oh, absolutely. Let me demonstrate here. See, this is great. Maybe next time we do this, I would love for people to send to email some pictures that we could play with. So let me think here. So what's a good example? On this one, if I wanted to really blur the background.
Do you take any portrait pictures of people?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let me get to one. Let me get to one that we can mess up. So let's see here. Let's go. So I'm going to go to the stuff that I have on my website because that's fun.
And this is going to be different than the portrait mode on an iPhone, which
that's right.
Basically is a Photoshop filter.
That's right. So let me think here. Okay, so how about this guy? I'm going to add him to my quick collection. And here we are in the before and after. Now, because I don't want to mess up this picture, I'm going to create a virtual copy. And in the virtual copy, I'm going to go to the develop module. And so this was taken with an older iPhone. And there was no portrait mode. And so the background is still pretty prominent. But if I take my adjustment brush, which is like masking, and I start painting over here, but I don't want to change the exposure. So I want to reset this whole thing. But I'm going to start painting here. And I guess I'm going to turn down clarity. So, and I'm trying to remember if sharpness, it's not as good as, if I really wanted to do that, I would do this in Photoshop. Here in Lightroom, I cannot extremely blur it. I can somewhat blur it, but I would take this into Photoshop, edit in Photoshop, apply the blur, and then bring it right back into here. So that would work, Joyce.
I saw two questions. One was about looking at the location module, and another one was how you use the smart collections to find duplicates. Oh,
that's a sore point. Lightroom, just like Apple Photos, inexplicably to me, does not include a way to look for duplicates. I do not know why that is such an omission. There are a couple of third-party plugins that do that, but they're confusing and complicated. I've used one or two with some success with folks. Yeah, no easy answer for duplicates. What was the other thing?
Looking at the location module and how you do.
Let me see here. Let's go into window, screen mode, normal. I don't know that I've even done much with the location. So that's map.
Yeah.
I have done some with it, yeah. Let's see. So let's zoom out quite a bit here.
I suppose if you had that last picture and it didn't have GPS coordinates in it already, and you knew the train stop you were at, you could add that.
Oh, exactly. But yeah, and because my my DSLRs don't have GPS, it's just my iPhone. I have to look at my iPhone pictures. So let's see here. And let's
You're able to look not just for any iPhone, but even you've taken the time to do it by particular iPhones too, haven't you?
Oh, yes, exactly. Just for fun, because it's nice to see. So this is the other thing about smart collections. You can build a smart collection around all kinds of criteria: the name of the phone, the lens that you were shooting with, et cetera, et cetera. Where the heck are my iPhones?
Was it the highlighted collection?
I had one with individual iPhones, which, I know why, because it's in my, I'm overly organized. Smart collections, technical. Here we go. iPhone, all my iPhone pictures, 17,000 of them. And then there's the breakdown by 3G, 3GS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's see if we can do the the location module here, if it'll work. Where are we? What's something recent? All right, so if I now go to map, is it working? I don't know.
You might want to open up the thumbnails down below.
Yeah. I don't know. You know what? It might be too slow or buggy or something. I do not know. I rarely go into it, unfortunately, alas. Let's see. Oh, it's almost 9 o'clock. Don't want to keep people too long. Any other questions? I apologize if this was too far off in one direction for some people or not enough, but I guess that's the nature of.
I'm seeing thumbs up from some of the audience members. And in fact, I'd like to invite everybody to give a round of applause as a gratitude for Ron for doing this presentation tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.